This we move into a second session. It's a little bit different. We've explained this morning that we never really worked with action plans, organic action plans. It was not our mission, but we had a very successful collaboration with Nick, who is also part of the CORE of Organic Targets for You project, and who already presented in March the status of this is a comparative overview of national regional organic action plans in Europe. We kindly ask him to now, roughly 6 months later, to repeat the exercise and from maybe some new findings tell us the status, followed by practical workshop where we will be divided into 2 groups and work from our home knowledge on where the research in these plans is placed. What is the vision for the research? Is there a vision for the research? So first I give floor to Nick to present the work, and then we will explain how the workshop will work before the lunch. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I will try to be slow, but as a first language English speaker, I'm not always as slow as I should be. I have been based in the United Kingdom for a long time. I'm now based at the Thünen Institute in Germany. And I still have been involved with organic farming policy research over a long period of time. So I'm pleased to be working on the Organic Targets for Europe project, and particularly on this question of action plans. The image at the front on my first slide is from the EU Organic Action Plan. So you have them at the European level. You also, sure it works. Should be pressing the button. Okay, well, if I just do next, it's working now, is it? Okay. So the work we're doing, I'm linking several different pieces of work. The Organic Targets for Europe project, which is ongoing, and where all the action plans that you've been able to look at have been brought together by us as part of that project. A report we did from the Thünen Institute last year on policy support for organic farming in Europe in the last programming period of the CAP, and some earlier work we've done with European funding and Interreg funding on best practice for organic action plans. This is the second edition published by the IFOAM EU group. It's obviously a long way to go on our action plan road. And obviously there are things coming around the bend which are quite unexpected. COVID and Ukraine and now Israel are all circumstances that change the policy framework. So things change all the time, and the organic sector is affected by that and has to find solutions as well. But if you look at the long-term trend at the European level, you'll see that there's been a fairly consistent expansion in the organic area over the last 20 years, roughly a doubling every 10 years, and a higher rate of growth in the last 10 years than the previous 10 years. Same is true also for the market, which has actually trebled every 10 years, so grown ninefold over 20 years, somewhat faster than the supply base has grown. So actually when we worry about market growth, the market is some way ahead in terms of growth than the production base. The question is, how do we get from here to the European Union target of 25%? And what role do the action plans play in that? Clearly, if we have another doubling in 10 years to 2030, we'll only get to from about 9% to about 18%. We're still quite a way short of the 25%. So we're having to speed things up again in the next decade, and the challenge is how to do that. I've just shown this slide from another study. I probably will skip over a few of these fairly quickly, but 25% means about 40 million hectares of land in European Union organic. There's the last two columns are the important ones here, the two different views of looking at that. One is on the third column, shows what it might look like if the production base was the same as the organic area now. And the other is what it might look like if the production more closely reflected agriculture as a whole as it is now. And you'll see, firstly, more permanent grassland in the organic as now situation, but you also find more grain legumes, more permanent crops, and a number of other situations where there's an overproportional representation in organic farming. It's interesting, grain legumes, for example, are already 25% of European grain legume production is organic. You've also got big differences between countries. I wouldn't take this too seriously. This is a notional scenario of what it might look like if every country was producing enough organic to get to the 25% target. But what we do have within this overall structure is that 4 countries dominate at the moment the European organic sector: Spain, Italy, France, and Germany. They produce about 60% of total organic production. So from that point of view, where should a focus be for future growth? Actually, there are some big Eastern European countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on that could be much more engaged with organic, and maybe that's where the growth is going to come from. But maybe the growth is coming from other places too. Just to say, this has implications, so big implications for nitrogen use, potentially 25%, maybe even 26% reduction in nitrogen use. That has big implications for the environment in terms of water quality, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, greenhouse gas emissions in organic land would also come from the reduction in overall livestock production and the increased area of clover grass and temporary laize. They're the 3 major changes. Some estimates we did suggested that about 60% of agricultural emissions could be saved on land that was converted to organic farming. So they're big potential environmental implications, but it's also, each country is different. The impacts in each country is different. These are also important research questions. And then biodiversity. Again, very different situations in different countries with different geographic and ecological situations. I'm not going to, this wasn't the main purpose of my talk, but just to illustrate these sorts of big environmental questions that come from organic. And food security comes up as a question. Again, there's a lot of concern about the reduced yields from organic farming. But actually, if you're reducing livestock numbers, you're reducing the demand for livestock feed. A lot of the agricultural production in Europe is to produce livestock feed, not food for human consumption. So there is a mitigating impact of the reduced number of livestock that needs to be taken account of. And very few studies have actually tackled that question of how the livestock numbers relate to the reduced output of crops in organic. I highlighted those because I think they're relevant parts of us thinking about strategies for moving forward. The European policy support is built around two key ideas, what's sometimes referred to as the duality of organic farming, that it delivers public goods, environmental and other public goods on the one hand, but it also delivers a market or economic potential on the other hand. So it's been, even from the first European action plan in 2004, but long before that, both aspects were important aspects for policy development. The problem is, in most institutions, policymakers in these two different areas, environment and economics, often don't work together very closely. and it's been very difficult to get always policies that bring those things together. Really important developments at the European Union were the legal definition of organic farming back in 1991, implemented since 1992, and the introduction in a couple of years later of conversion and maintenance payments for organic farming on a widespread basis. Again, my presentation is not about these in detail, but it's to say we've got that big background of policy, but they tend to drive the supply more than necessarily the markets, and they tend to drive and the question of how you get the right balance between environmental and market policies is also an important question. So this is where action plans come in, because they provide the opportunity to integrate different policies to try and get a more systemic view of the whole process. So where are we with action plans in Europe? I have to say the whole drive for the CAP strategic plans has also brought with it a lot of effort by member states to develop new organic action plans. And you'll see that almost every member state except 2 have got an official, no, that's not quite right. I should remember Belgium doesn't count. Belgium has the regional action plans, as we know, as with the CAP strategic plans, but the others have got national organic action plans. The big countries like France, Germany, Italy, and Spain have a lot of regional action plans as well, but are also having some national action plans. I haven't tried to analyze the regional action plans apart from the 2 Belgian ones. There's a limit to what can be done. So this shows you very much the green is where we are now. The blue is where countries had something in the recent past into the form of an action plan, and the grey shows you the history before that. So more countries have become involved with organic action plans and are implementing them. And there's quite a few starting this year. We haven't been able to analyze all of them because some of them were still in draft form and not publicly available. So there are some key things that the action plans have in common. They involve setting targets for the development of the organic sector. Now, these should be usually smart or relevant. They should be ambitious, potentially. They should be time-related, quantifiable. So 25% by 2030, as the EU target is an example of that. They need to recognize the dual role of organic farming that I've talked about, the delivery of public goods and the delivery of economic potential. They need to recognize the local needs and priorities of the organic sector in a region or country and try to address those, because every country is at a different stage of development. I think there's also a lot of potential to build private-public partnerships within that framework. It doesn't all have to be done by public agencies. Some of it can be done in cooperation with companies, with groups of actors in order to move things forward. And then there's the need to integrate supply push and demand pull type measures. We'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, but supply push is essentially saying you pay farmers to become organic, so you increase the supply, and it's driven by the policymakers. On the other hand, you could say, let's get the consumer to demand organic, and we pull the interest through that demand from the consumer side. But to get the balance between those, again, is a tricky thing. Sorry, it's gone the wrong way. So in terms of targets, every country pretty much sets a land area target in the most recent action plans. That might be also related to a percentage increase. It might be number of farms. In one case, at least Ireland, their sector-specific targets. So they've said that set a target for arable, set a target for beef, set a target for dairy, and so on. There's also probably most countries now have a market target, either as a share of the retail sales, the share of the market, sometimes in relation to domestic consumption, sometimes in relation to the balance between exports and domestic consumption. And so also quite often in relation to public procurement, so the percentage of food sold used in schools or hospitals and so on that is from organic origin. Less common, but it's an important area to be thought about, is the whole area of information and targets related to information. The share of research funding is sometimes used. There's a couple of examples in the action plans or that are being considered for action plans where the people have argued that the share should be, for research, should be similar to the land area target share in order to get a closer link between the two things. The other one where I would hope, because of this duality that I talked about, there would be more targets would be in relation to environmental deliveries, but there are very few of those. In fact, I don't think there's any that I've found yet that has a specific, we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by X because of our organic area or something like that. So looking at the land area targets, this just is a very quick summary of where we are with the different stages. If you look at the green and yellow parts of the column shows you where we had got to by 2018 in terms of the land area percentage in each country. The blue shows you what is planned under the CAP strategic plans and where funding has been committed by 2027. And the top grey area shows you what countries have set as their national action plan targets or sometimes separate policy targets for organic. So, and the percentage, the figures on each column show you the year by which that target has been set. So some are only still for 2027. So there is a difference between what has been planned and funding committed and what is being hoped for in many of these targets. But you can see there's a wide range of targets there. And I think it's important to see this because when the EU has a 25% target for land area, it's not expecting that every country should reach 25%. It's quite happy to see Ireland, for example, grow from 2.5% to 10% as a significant increase in terms of what was there previously, while clearly Austria, with already 25%, shouldn't just stay at 25%. It might, the national target is now 35%. So you'll get different responses in different regions, and that's perfectly appropriate. So just to summarize that quickly, you've got your EU target, you've got member states. Their individual targets that I showed on the previous slide come to just about 20% of EU land area. Our other forecast suggests that maybe we can reach 16 to 18%, but we still need to do quite a lot more to get to the, if we really want to get to the EU target of 25% by 2030. I mentioned market targets. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but percent of market share, per capita consumption, percent of public procurement, these are all relevant targets that are being used. Again, we've got a balanced land area, which generates the environmental benefits primarily, and market targets, and make sure that they're linked to each other. And I'm not sure it's necessarily the case that you have to have, if you have a land area target of 20%, that you have to have a market target of 20%, because obviously some parts of what's produced on the land is being used as an intermediate input to other products. So it's not necessarily the case that the market target has to be the same. This is the really important bit, though. It's what goes into these action plans, because you set the targets. And I said there's this distinction between supply push, type actions which encourage producers, maybe processors and so on to get involved in the market. And there's demand pull, which influences the behavior of consumers. And at the same time, you've got this balance between the public good, environmental deliveries, and the market or economic rural development deliveries. And you can see that there's quite a big range of different measures that can be used. Area support, capital investment. Critical for this group, there's a range of information and advice, training and education, professional events, research and innovation, statistics and market data initiatives within these action plans. And they're all linked to research in some way. So it's best not to see them completely in isolation. And then you've got, of course, a lot of things happening around work and investment in the marketplace. Again, the people working in the food industry are a separate group from the farmers. There's sometimes interaction between the two, but they're often quite different groups. And then you've got the need for information for consumers, maybe for public procurement. If you've got local authorities buying organic food, they need to know some background information and so on. So there's quite a lot of information related things around that. And all of that is supported by the organic regulations, and in some countries by national logos like the French AB symbol, or the Danish symbol, or Austria has a symbol, Germany has a symbol for organic, so that, as well as the European logo. So there are different ways of supporting those. I'm running out of time probably, but I'm very nearly the end. Okay. So what I wanted to just pick on was some examples of research and innovation actions. And I do this conscious that I've left people out, and that wasn't with anything badly intended. And I've only put in part of what the countries have said for research and innovation. But I thought this would help illustrate the breadth of things that we're looking at and maybe discussing during the day today. So Austria talks about a dedicated funding stream for organic research. That also exists in several other countries. Talks about more industry and international cooperation. That comes up quite frequently in the action plans. So the linking in with initiatives like CORE Organic and so on comes through quite strongly. Some, like the Austrians, have focused in on public good type research themes like climate impacts, soil organic matter, build up and so on. Others have focused in on more technical issues. What for me stands out in Austria has been the focus on market and statistical data. For me, that's been a really important issue for the whole of the organic sector in Europe. But it's something that isn't just a 3-year research project. It's something that has to be done continuously, because it's done continuously for the rest of agriculture. It's not something that can just stop after a few years. So Czech Republic or Czechia, similarly increasing funding, setting priorities. So again, that comes through in some of the others about setting up task forces, like in Hungary, to try to identify priorities. We've had in Germany, at least in ministerial statements, maybe the actual new action plan isn't yet published, a commitment to matching the research funding to the area target of 30%. Again, we have to be careful about how that's defined, because you can go through all the research that's funded and make a case that it's relevant for organic farming, but it may not be very directly focused on the needs of organic farming, and that would be the question. Then you've got some like Finland with a very specific focus on the needs of field vegetable and greenhouse production. So they've come in really down to a specific need, which is quite appropriate for an action plan. We've got Croatia with focus on new technologies, soil and pesticide residue analysis, which seems to be more related into some of the implementation of certification than necessarily the needs of organic producers specifically. but also focusing on aquaculture. So in a few of the plans, aquaculture is mentioned as a specific area for research. In Hungary, the reference to the agroecology and living labs theme is there, which is very much fitting with the presentations we heard earlier. In Luxembourg, true cost accounting, internalizing external costs, and the policy options for doing that comes through. So we get that coming through in a few countries, that they're looking at the public benefit side of things. And then Portugal focused on the idea of linking in a demonstration network with the research effort, which I think was relevant. And then Sweden supporting research and innovation at all levels, but particularly financing of research institutes or capacity building. I think that's also quite an important issue for organic research. But they came up and talked about the need for a systems approach where we were integrating production, environment, animal welfare, and economic issues within the programs, and not looking at things too broken down into specific problem areas. As I say, this is only a snapshot. We're going to talk about it in much more detail during the day, looking at all of your individual experiences. But I think you'll have seen from looking at your own plans that there is quite some detail there, which is worth focusing on. Just to finish, the last slide I want to show is about funding, because this is a critical issue. The main funding streams supporting the action plans are actually the CAP Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 funding streams. The area support comes out of either eco-schemes or agri-environment climate type measures. There's also a number of rural development things, and especially the innovation partnerships are relevant in this context. Promotion and research at the European level, clearly, consumer promotion would be the promotion, I think, but the research funding is also relevant. And national funding, either specifically focused on the action plan or through national research and information programs. I think it's quite important here to reflect on that, because it's not that the government needs to turn around and say, we've put down all the money for this action plan on the table as one fund. More to say, for research, we're going to access the funds that we have for our national research funding program, or we're going to access Pillar 1 or Pillar 2 payments for this. So we use different funding mechanisms to get to it. For me, the critical thing, though, is that the funding has been thought about, because otherwise action plans are just a paper exercise that you can put away in a drawer afterwards. And then the private sector partnerships, I think, is something that needs to be worked on much more than in the past. And I come from a UK background where UK government funding has been somewhat limited for organic farming, and private sector partnerships have been very important in moving some initiatives forward. So to conclude, national and regional organic action plans are an important tool for supporting the development of organic farming. Careful attention needs to be paid to the targets and to the actions in the context of local needs and priorities. Research and development, innovation, statistics, and market data are all really important parts of that, linking with all the other information work with advice, training, education, and so on. I emphasize that because one of the things we're looking about and trying to think about the implications of is that if we treble the size of the European organic sector to get to 25%, that will mean 1 million, at least 1 million new people engaging with organic farming ideas on a professional level. And we need to think, how do we get the institutional changes necessary to enable those people to get access to information and good quality evidence and research data? And I say that needs also the funding commitments behind it. But that's my main conclusions from today. Thank you for listening, and you've got these various publications to work with, and I'm very happy to follow up with people after today's meeting if you want to pick up any issues.
Thank you very much, Nick. Do we have any clarification questions for Nick? We can have 1 or 2 questions just for clarification, and then we should move on because we promised to catering people also to have lunch and to maintain a level of the program as much as we can. But if there is something that you were interested to ask, please, if there is anybody. Bram?
You had thank you very much for an interesting presentation. You had a certain this figure where you said, well, this is the area target where they are now, and then a percentage what is planned for, and I think budget for, or and then the ambition how to which percentage they want to attain. I didn't understand very much how you determined the blue part and the gray part. How do you, from where did you get that data? Yeah, I think it's the, yeah, so the plan support, yeah.
The blue area comes from the CAP strategic plans that the member states published. So they have put together for organic farming maintenance and conversion support the amounts they intend to spend between 2023 and 2027 on developing organic farming. So they've estimated the cost, they put that into their budgets for the CAP, and they've got the areas. So that's the blue bit. The grey bit on top is the published targets that they've made either as government commitments. So in Germany, for example, the 30% figure is a government commitment through the coalition agreement, not yet in the published new plan, but it will be. It's expected to be in the published new plan. But that's those figures, the 30% or 35% for Austria. They're additional targets that come through the action plans or other government statements. Again, Ireland is another case where they had a 7.5% target in the CAP strategic plan, and they've now said they're aiming for 10%. So there are countries moving forward from also already from their CAP commitments.
We take Bram's and we take Monica's question, and then we need to move on into the workshops.
Thanks for the presentation, Nick. You mentioned that, or you give the example of Germany having a target for research funding of 30%. We have a similar target at the European Commission. And as you rightly indicated, the problem with this target is to then monitor afterwards if this target is met and to qualify if a research call or research project falls. If it's relevant for organic, it's a target for organic. And we might have the same problem with the partnership, the agroecology partnership, that can have calls specifically for organic or can have calls that are in the wider scope relevant for organic. So what criteria would you suggest to identify if a certain call can be considered to be relevant for organic?
Yeah, I'll use this now to save you running backwards and forwards all the time. Clearly, I think if it's directly for organic, the German Pearl program is an example. If it's directly for organic, yes, that counts. There's no question. I think quite a few broader agroecology type projects would also count in my view, because they would be generating a lot of information that is highly relevant and usable by organic farmers. I think there is a real case for other projects to sometimes be set with an organic perspective as part of the project. So if I think about some examples I dealt with in the past, organic farmers have a real problem in the United Kingdom with sheep production with parasite control. Then there's lots of funding going for sheep parasite control, but all of it focused on chemical controls. It wouldn't take very much more to add an organic work package into those projects to really enable the same very specialized, experienced researchers to focus on organic solutions. So I think there is some scope there, but then I would say only the organic work package would be relevant to organic, not all the other work packages on alternative treatments that wouldn't be permitted under organic. So I think those are the three main areas. I think there are some maybe blue sky things which you could argue, say, yes, that would be good for organic, but is that just the researcher's opinion? Or is there a real need accepted within the sector? And I think that there is certainly an argument for an expert review of those from an organic perspective or an agroecology perspective to say, yes, that really is relevant, or maybe it's not so relevant.
Thank you. Monica, please.
Thank you for your presentation. As a person from Lithuania, you notice that Lithuania don't have separate action plan for organics. And I wanted to ask, like, if we have no initiative from the ministry, and as a research institute, what we can do? Maybe you have suggestions what we can act to have it in Lithuania.
I think there are three forces that tend to work together on member states or regional states to bring about an action plan, and they come politically from the European Commission. I know that some countries introduced action plans as a requirement to get their CAP strategic plans agreed. So they were directly pushed by the European Commission to do something about an action plan. The second clearly is that there's an interested party within a ministry that would like to take it forward. And the other one is that the organic sector also pushes for an action plan. So those are the pressures can come from three directions, but it will normally take two of those to work together to get that. I don't know how how the situation in Lithuania is working. I don't know enough about the situation, so I can't really be specific about that. But I think, I think there's a lot that can be learned from the fact that 25 other countries now have action plans in place, that people can become aware that these are happening, and start to pick up experiences from neighboring countries and so on as to how to move forward. And the first plan doesn't have to be super ambitious. It's also a learning process for each country in terms of policy implementation.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for providing this additional insights through the questions. I think I would like to give applause for this discussion and for Nick's presentation first.